So just the basic background setting for where we're starting now, Tzarech Lahavin, the second part of Vav. The Rebbe brought in the beginning of the Maamar that a Geirel is the common denominator between Yom Kippur and Purim. A Geirel is the idea of L'mayla Meishtalshalos, and therefore a Geirel is the source of Kibayim Hazeh Yechaper Aleichem, and Yom Kippur, which is connected with Geirel, brings about Kapara. Purim was the union of Geirel, that brought about the Ness of Purim. So the Rebbe asked the question, if Geirel is such a lofty level that brings about the Kapara of Eden, because it's higher than Ishtalshalos, then why did Haman make a Pur? Haman was out to destroy the Eden. L'cheira, Pur is a good thing for the Eden. And the Rebbe explained that in the levels of Ishtalshalos, even though Haman was coming to point out the faults of Yidden, the Averis, to be Mekatrig on Yidden, nevertheless, he knew that as bad as Yidden are going to be, they're still better than him, and his Ketrugim are going to be powerless. The only way he could have some chance against the Yidden is by accessing the level of Geirel. Because since in Geirel, the level of Geirel is higher than Ishtalshalos, everything is equal. So there could be a way that Haman will have the upper hand over Yidden. But in Ishtalshalos, the worst Yid is Melei and Mitzvahs B'Karim, and with their Averis themselves, they're still better than him. And I just want to illustrate this point with a story that I just heard this year. Someone told me, apparently it's going around in WhatsApps, but I didn't see it, so I don't know who else read the story. There was a Bacher who was learning in Eretz Yisrael in Tafshin Mem Zayin. Tafshin Mem Zayin was when there was Heitevis, the Sfarim, and in New York there was huge celebrations. This Bacher was from New York. And everyone is dancing in New York. He's learning in Eretz Yisrael. He couldn't resist. He picked himself up and he flew to New York. But he didn't get rishus from the yeshiva, from the Anhala. So when he got to New York, his father was very upset with him. How do you leave yeshiva without permission? He gave him a cold shoulder. So Hey Tevis was Tuesday. He probably got to Crown Heights on Wednesday, and he was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Friday night, his father comes home for the Shabbos meal and gives him a big hug. So he says, what happened? I thought we're like a frosty relationship now. So his father told him, his father was very close with the Rebbe, with the Rebbitzin. He was one of those who took care of their medical. Friday night, his father would always go into the Rebbitzin. So he went into the Rebbitzin that Friday night, and every time she would ask him about his family, and ask specifically about each of his children. So when she asked about this son, so the father says, I'm not so happy with him right now. He came in without rishus. He's in yeshiva. He didn't listen. So the Rebbitzin said, other places, there's Bachrim that also do things wrong. What are the things they're doing wrong when they leave yeshiva without rishus? They're going to movie houses. Your son ran away from yeshiva without rishus to be by the Rebbe. Says that's his Averis. You should be happy. That's his Averis. So that's why he came home with this. So this is what the Rebbe says in the Maamar. The Yidden who Haman's going to point out their Averis, that itself is going to be, make him lose. Says those are their Averis. Look who you're trying to start up with. So Haman had to reach higher than Ishtalshalos. And higher than Ishtalshalos over there, he could have a chance of having the upper hand. So behemshich to that, the Rebbe brought that Achashverosh shows also on higher than Ishtalshalos. Achris v'reishis shaloi. It's the level of Keser. The Gemara says Chash, it's the silence that's higher than speech, that's higher than Ishtalshalos. In the second paragraph in Vav, it says, V'tzarech lahavin, he's bringing out how the inyan of Achashverosh illustrates the same idea that dafka from the level of higher than Ishtalshalos, because over there you're not looking so detailed in the Torah mitzvahs, there's a possibility of Klippa having an upper hand over Yidden. It says, V'tzarech lahavin, the Gemara and Gemara seems to say a completely opposite interpretation of the name Achashverosh. The Gemara says that Achashverosh hu al shem shehushchiru pneihem shel Yisrael b'yamav. The Gemara says that the root of the name Achashverosh is from shacher, from black, because the faces of Yidden were blackened from their suffering in his days. It says like kishulei k'deira, they became black like a pot, like the bottom of a pot. So this seemingly negative connotation of the name Achashverosh, that his name is showing on the terrible suffering that Yidden endured under him, How does that go together with the interpretation Shachashverosh Umisha Achris V'Reishis Shalei that we said in the last paragraph, that the letters of Achashverosh show on the Eibishter on the highest level of godliness that encompasses the beginning and the end together, because it's Seiviv Umakiv, because it's above the whole Ishtalshalos. The answer is based on the same concept that we said before. The Hi and Esanes, these two go together. L'mayla mishtalshlos is the only root, the only possibility of there being hushcheru pneihem, of blackening the faces of Yidden, of bringing about oppression to Yidden. The kivan shemitzad haseviv shalamayla mishtalshlos. It's because there was then the level of Achashverosh, the level of Seviv, the level of godliness that's higher than Ishtalshlos. Achris v'reishis shalei, that transcends the difference between top and bottom. That in that level, Eir v'cheshach shavim lefanav, light and darkness are equal because it's higher than Ishtalshlos, like we said before. L'chein, therefore, mibchina sashtika, from that level of l'mayla mishtalshlos, that's the level of chash of Achashverosh, of silence, the silence that's higher than dibur, like we learned last time. Chash to Achashverosh, shel l'mayla midibur, that allows, because there's light and darkness are equal, that also gives the possibility that darkness should become overpowering light. Nishtalshal, from that comes out al yidei ribui tzimtzumim hashtika shalamayla midibur, the lower level of silence, a silence that's lower than speech, that person doesn't speak when he's supposed to speak. So from shtika that represents higher than ishtalshlos comes out shtika that represents a helam v'hester, a absence, a state of concealment. Why? Because from higher than ishtalshlos is the possibility of not giving credit to Yidden for their virtues. So that comes out the lower level of shtika, that the silence portrays the idea, shalikusu behelim, silence portrays concealment, that godliness is hidden, is concealed. Helim kipshute shalamata megilui, that here we're talking about the literal sense of shtika, of concealment, that there's the absence of gilui, the lack of revelation. Va'ad, till the fullest level of shtika, la shtika, that's described, that's contained in the pasuk, like it says in the pasuk, kirachel lifnei geizezeha nalama, like the sheep that's silenced in the face of those who are shearing it. That pasuk is used to show a silence in the face of being sort of overpowered, dominated. That the silence in the pasuk is describing, is representing not only a lack of gilui alikus, like a silence in the simple sense that I have something to say and I don't say, so there's a helam, there's a lack of gilui, but more than that, the ones who are shearing the sheep, shearing the wool, are silencing the sheep. In other words, that's describing, it's representing shagam ha-klipa masteres al alakus, that the klipa, so to speak, overpowering alakus, it's hiding, it's concealing. There's an active concealment. Klipas nega shenikra as chash, and in klipa itself, there's two levels. There's klipas nega, the lower, the higher level, the neutral level of klipa, which is called chash of klipa, the silence of klipa. Vadsha mischaberes and gimel klipas atmeyes, or even worse than that, gimel klipas atmeyes, the lower level of klipa, which is called reish. Rush, like we said, that's the level of poverty, the way it is in klipa. So at any rate, Achashverosh, in a high level, the chash of Achashverosh is the silence that's higher than speech, the levels of l'mayla mishtalshalos, but that's the cause, that's the root of Achashverosh, the way chash and reish are there in klipa, the hushchru pneihem, the possibility of there being an upper hand to klipa, to the negative forces. So this all, again, is elaborating on what we explained, that the reason why Haman made a poor was because Haman knew the only possibility of Yidden Chas v'Shalom being defeated is when the conduct is based, when the running of the world is based on higher than ishtalshalos, where it's not necessarily that proper due credit is going to be given to the virtues of Yidden, and therefore there's a possibility of Klippa defeating Yidden Chas v'Shalom. So now, but this raises a further question. So in explaining why Haman had to make a poor, so the Rebbe brought out how we see the same idea by Achashverosh. But in that case, so al pi Torah, when Achashverosh was the king, that tells us that that time, Beruchnius, it was a period of Achashverosh. It was a period when the level of Elikus that was dominating, so to speak, was the level of Achris Vireshus Shaloi, the level of Makif that's higher than Ishtalshalos. So Haman should have been able to be successful anyways, because it's the same idea as the poor. Why did Haman have to go through the whole bother of making a poor, making a lot, that Chassidus says he was trying to reach higher than Ishtalshalos, if in any case the world was being run, it was the kingdom, it was the ruling of Achashverosh, which is higher than Ishtalshalos? That's going to be now the question. V'yesh leimar da'ata malzeh. The reason, according to this, Shahaman hipil pur, that Haman made his geirel, made his lot, b'chtei lahagia lebchinas hageirel shalamayla mishtalshlos, in order to reach, in order to access this level of geirel that's above ishtalshlos, because he understood that the only possibility that Yidden who are so virtuous should be defeated is because lamayla mishtalshlos, light and darkness are equal. But what did he need that for? Seemingly in any case, Afsha Az, seemingly then in any case, Bimei Achashverosh, since it was the days of Achashverosh. So even Kaidem Sheipel Pur Haisa Anhaga Mitzad L'mayla Mishtashlos, the mere fact that it was under the rulership of Achashverosh tells us already that then was the level of godliness of Achris Vireshus Shalei. So what did Haman want to gain by adding to this, by making a Pur? So the Rebbe is going to explain now there's two levels in higher than Ishtalshalos. It says, Lefisha b'chinas ha'geirel hu l'mayla yeser mibchinas ha'chashveresh misha achres v'reishes shaloi. The higher than Ishtalshalos that's represented by geirel is more higher than Ishtalshalos than the Achashverosh, like we're going to explain. And Haman, in order to achieve his goal, in order to be able to have any sense of power over Yidden, he had to really access the highest level of L'mayla Mishtalshalos, where there's no recognition of any virtues, any milas. Because if there's any recognition of milas, he knew that Yidden are going to be way above him. V'inyan says, where do we see, in what do we see, that despite the fact that Achashverosh is Achris Vireshus Shaloi, it's not as much above Ishtalshalos as Geirel? It says, the mizeh atzmi, from the fact in itself, shenikra b'shem Achashverosh, that Achashverosh, which, like we said, it goes, the Medrash says it goes on the Eibishter, it represents a level of godliness, which is Misha Achris Vireshus Shaloi, and it represents that level of godliness that's higher than Ishtalshalos, that joins together Achris Vireshus, but that tells us also a, so to speak, limitation in its L'mayla Mishtalshalos. It says in Achashverosh it's a level of Elikus where there's the existence of Achris and Reshus. There's a higher level and a lower level. They're brought together. They're as one, but they're there. There is some distinction between them. Muchach, it tells us Shegam Legabei, regarding, next to, relevant to this level of Ishtalshalos, of higher than Ishtalshalos, Yeshnam ha'inyanim the Achris v'Reishis. There is a Achris and there is a Reishis, there's higher levels and lower levels. Ella shehem shavin legabei, it's a level that sees them as being equal. But it's not a real equality, because a real equality, legabe, completely l'mayla mishtalshalos, there doesn't exist to begin with a distinction between higher and lower. There's no higher and lower. This is the Eibishter himself. So that in the level of Achashverosh there's an Achris and Reishis that are somehow seen as equals, it tells us it's a level of higher than Ishtalshalos that sees, that perceives, that recognizes the realities of Ishtalshalos to some degree, but it equates them. It's not the ultimate higher than Ishtalshalos. And the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this in the brackets now. Olahar mimashakasav, this idea we could also find somewhat in that it says, Asa mishta l'chol sara v'avada. When Achashverosh made his banquets, so first he made a banquet to the people on a higher level. Kol sara v'avada, his officers, his slaves, v'achar kach l'chol ha'ama nimtzaim b'shushan. And then he made another party for everyone. Mavur b'Likutei Torah, it says in Likutei Torah, Shagili shahaya l'chol ha'am, these parties, we know when we're learning Chassidus, Achashverosh is Elikus, it's levels of godliness. the parties were revelations of godliness. Says the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah that the gili for everyone, for kol ha'aman nimtzaim b'Shushan, haya lemata b'madrega me'agili shaya l'sarav avadav, was a lower level. It was a party, it was a lower hashpah, a lower gili alakos than the gili alakos that was there for the sarav avadav, for his higher officers. Why was it a lower level? It's because even the Lamaila Mehishtalshalos was a Lamaila Mehishtalshalos where there was some existence, some recognition of the levels of Ishtalshalos, to the point of there being able to be a distinction between the Hashpah to Sarav Avadav, which is obviously higher levels and higher Elames, and Kol Ha'aman Nimtzaim b'Shushan. Ola Haisif, to add to this again, where you see that this was a level of L'mayla Mishtalshlos that recognized, that perceived distinctions between levels. You see it even more. Even in the big banquet that was to everyone. You see in Chazal that there was kama v'kama chilukei dargas. There was a number of different levels in the way people participated and were able to enjoy the party. Like the Gemara says, Haroi lechatzer lechatzer, Haroi legina legina, Haroi lebisan lebisan, that everyone had their station in the party. Those who were worthy of a courtyard, there were those who were worthy of the garden, those who were worthy of the bisan, of the small gazebos. V'yesh leimar, shemitzad bechinas hishtalshlus. Hagili hurak lesarim va'avadim. Says so. Now the Rebbe is going to explain how these distinctions they're not hishtalshlus. They're not the ultimate l'mayla mishtalshlus. They're the l'mayla mishtalshlus that has some relationship with hishtalshlus. Mitzad bechinas hishtalshlus, if the hashpa, if it was the level of godliness that's in hishtalshlus, that everything is according to the sequence, according to in an orderly fashion, then hagili hurak lesarim va'avadim. Then gili alikus could only be to someone who's on a high level, who's a keli, who's a vehicle for it, which is sarim va'avadim, whatever levels, whatever worlds that represents. So therefore, that there was b'chalal in any way, shape, or form a banquet that was open to everyone, that's obviously a level that's higher than the shtalshus. That there was in some form of gili that went to everyone, even to the lowest level of the nation, the lowest level of the general public, those who are fit only for a chatzer, for the courtyard, is the lowest level of the general public. Why was that? That there was able to be some gili alikus to everyone is because it's l'mayla mishtalshlos, because ishtalshlos isn't mashpia to kolam. Umikoma came, and that despite the fact that seemingly it was open to the public, there was still differences and different hashpahs to the people who are on different levels, tells me it was a l'mayla mishtalshlos that was very, very closely connected to ishtalshlos. Hagili leha'am haya lemata me'agili l'sarav avadav, v'gam ba'agili la'am haya kama dargas. There was all the different levels of what exactly kind of hashpah every person got. That tells me kizesha achris v'reishis shaloi, the level of higher than ishtalshlos that's represented in the name Achashverosh, that the beginning and the end are equal to him. Who shall legabei achris v'reishis ein b'shavan. He's l'mayla mishtalshlos, a level of alikus that's above, that's removed from ishtalshlos. For him, everything is equal. Avol benegel agili shaloi ba'elameis. But he's close to Elames, and when he deals, when he's mashpia, when he gives the revelation of Elikus into the Elames, it's in a way that there's differences in the Elames because he's close to the Elames. Ba'elames al yenim reishis hu begilu yeser, mi ba'elames atachtenim achris, there's more gili in higher worlds than in lower worlds. So it's a l'mayla mishtalshos that enables that the gili should be to everyone, but in different ways, in differing levels. Masha'en Kein b'bchinas hagero. So the l'mayla mishtalshlos of Achashverosh is a l'mayla mishtalshlos that gives some recognition of ishtalshlos, and therefore it gives differences. Geirel is a higher level in L'mayla Mishtalshalus, the level of Elikus that's completely removed from Mishtalshalus, that there's no such a thing as higher and lower of Sarav, Avadav, and Kala'am. Everything is equal, everything is one. In Geirel, Ein Melachatchila Ha'inyan de Reishis V'Achris, there is no Reishis V'Achris. Kemuvon mizeh shahageirel hu bichlal b'shnei dvarim shavim, like we said in the beginning of the Maamar. Where does someone make a geirel? When he has two choices that are equal. That they're equal is that the whole idea of throwing a lot, making a geirel, is when I have to make a determination when there's nothing, no other factor that can help me make determination. There's no differences at all. There's no distinctions. In Alakus, it means it's a level of L'mayla Mishtalshalos that's so removed from Mishtalshalos that there's no differences at all between a higher Elamis and lower Elamis. So now we understood that the L'mayla Mishtalshalos of Geirel Dafka is that L'mayla Mishtalshalos that doesn't give room for any type of distinction at all. Haman needed that, therefore. He needed Dafka Geirel in order for him to reach his goal. That Yidden shouldn't have any sense of credibility, of extra recognition. It wasn't enough that L'mayla Mishtalshalos of Achashverosh that still sees some amount of distinction, then Yidden are going to come out above. He had to have a Geirel. He had to be Hipul. And first we're going to bring it out why it's relevant. Just like there's the difference between the distinctions between Achris and Reishis, between higher levels and lower levels, between the way it is in Achashverosh and the way it is in Geirel, al derech zehu b'negeya l'kedusha v'sitra achra. The same thing is with regards to the distinction in general between kedusha and sitra achra, holiness and negativity. That in L'mayla Mishtalshalos there's no distinction. It's Eir and Cheshach are equal, light and darkness are the same. It's different the way they're the same mitzad Achashverosh and the way they're the same mitzad Geirel. Achashverosh says they're the same because it puts them together, but it still sees these subtle differences. Just like Achashverosh saw subtle differences between Maila and Mata, and there was a difference in how the hashpah was served out. In Geirel, there's no difference to begin with. Shemitzad hadarged Achashverosh, the level of Achashverosh, just like it sees some distinction between Achris and Reishis, between higher levels and lower levels. Yesh chiluk, there's also a difference, at least a subtle difference, bein kedusha l'sitra achra, between holiness and evil. Ela shemitzad hareimimus ein ze teifes makim kol kach. Achashverosh doesn't give so much importance to the difference between Kedusha and Sitra Achra. And that's why we said earlier that Achashverosh gives a possibility of Hushcheru Pneim Shal Yisrael, that there should be oppression of Yidden. But since Achashverosh recognizes the difference, it can also bring out the fact that Yidden should come out above. For Haman to be sure of his result that he wanted, that Yidden shouldn't have any upper hand at all, he needed Dafka Geirel. Because V'lachein bitzad Achashverosh, there's a possibility, since there's a weak distinction between Kedusha and Klippa, Efshar liyis yunika gam l'sitra achra. There could be also hashpah, there could be nesinas keich, livelihood, sustenance given to Sitra Achra, to Klippa, to Chosh, to Klippas Nega, V'reish, the Gimel Klippas Atmeis, to the two levels of Klippa that are contained in the name of Achashverosh, Chosh and Reish, Klippas Nega and Gimel Klippas Atmeis, like we said before. Va'ad, and therefore there's a possibility, even from the higher than Ishtalshalos of Achashverosh, Shatia his Gabros Sitra Achra ala Kedusha, because there's a very weak distinction between Sitra Achra and Kedusha. It's possible that Sitra Achra should come out above, and that's why, like we said, the name Achashverosh that shows on Achris V'reishis Shaloi, the same exact name contains the idea of Hushcheru Pneim Shal Yisrael, of the Yidden's faces becoming blackened from their suffering, from their oppression. V'yesh leimar al derech shmomith biyadayim titafetz v'hi beheichle melech, that you could take an insect and in the palace of the king, it could be there, and you don't pay attention to it because of the reimimus, because of the aloofness of the king. So there could be lowly things, and nothing is tefes makim. It doesn't carry a person. Avshi melachleches at heichal, even though it dirties the heichal. Ki mitzad reimimus shel hamelech eini nesin leiv lahakbir legasha. The loftiness of the king causes him not to pay attention to small things, not even to chase out something that doesn't belong in the palace. In our case, because of the loftiness of Achashverosh, of this level of being above Ishtalshalos, so Klippa is not distanced, is not pushed away, and it gives the possibility that Klippa should, Chas v'shalom, overpower Yidden, oppress Yidden, and cause their faces to be blackened. But since there's some amount of distinction between Klippa and Kedusha, so Klippa doesn't fully overpower Yidden. It can't loyla hashmidam chas v'shalom. The level of Achashverosh will allow Yidden's faces to be blackened. It would never allow success in Haman's scheme to chas v'shalom destroy the Yidden. There's enough of a distinction even there between Kedusha and Klippa to prevent the possibility of Yidden being destroyed. Haman wouldn't have a chance of success if all he had was the... No, even at the level of Achashverosh. So Haman therefore had to go higher than that. He needed Dafka Agiril. Achashverosh wasn't good enough. Achshabikesh Haman. Therefore, when Haman aimed Lahashmid as Kala Yehudim Chas v'Shalom Hayalesia, he wanted to destroy the Yidden. He wasn't satisfied with their faces being blackened. He pilpur hu agiril. He had to reach a higher level of elikos. It's not enough. It's anyways the times of Achashverosh. It's bimei Achashverosh. No, he needed a pur. He needed the ultimate level of higher than Ishtalshalos. The kivan shebebchinas hagiril, since in the level of geril, ein melachatchila chiluk ben kedusha l'sitra achar, and the level of geril, there's no distinction at all. There's no difference at all between kedusha and sitra achar. ובפרט לפי המבור לאל שהגרל הוא לא רק למעלה משתלשל אלא למעלה גם מהרצון לתורה מצווה. We said earlier in the Maamar that the level of gerel is higher than ratzin. So Torah mitzvah, so to speak, doesn't carry weight over there. So that they even do Torah mitzvah, it's not going to change things. What? So he knew how to get there because he did get there. He made a pur. Haman made a pur and he got to that gerel. And despite that, that's going to be the whole ness of Purim, that even though he knew exactly what he's doing, we're understanding his scheme and we see he had it very, very well planned out. And despite that, Hashem turned everything over in his face. L'chein chashav, he thought, sha'idei ze yuchal chas v'shalom lahafik zmama, he thought, this is the sure way for me to achieve my goal, by reaching a gerel, because gerel could allow me, could give the possibility, chas v'shalom, that I should even destroy Yidden, because it's completely above ishtalshalos. There's no distinction, there's no separation at all between any no recognition of any differences. Let's just say Ha'ara 60. V'yesh leimar, says the Rabbi, now we can understand a deeper appreciation for the words of the pasuk in the Megillah. It says, B'shna shteim esrei lamelech Achashverosh hipil pur. The pasuk describes, in the 12th year of Achashverosh's reign, Haman made the pur. In the simple sense, it's just giving us a historical date of how to place everything. It says the Rabbi, no, it's much deeper. The pasuk is describing they were already in the era of Achashverosh. They were already in an era of higher than Ishtalshalos. And yet that wasn't good enough because Haman wanted to cause the suffering of the Yidden to be much more than it already was. He wanted to destroy them. And therefore he had to go beyond Achashverosh to a higher l'mayla mishtalshalos level than Achashverosh and reach the level of Purim. Neisav al b'shnas l'melech Achashverosh, in addition to the fact that they were already 12 years in Achashverosh, they were already in the era of l'mayla mishtalshalos that's represented in Achashverosh, he pil Pur hu ageril, he wanted to go beyond that and to access the level of Purim. V'hinei, oisches. What time is it? What time? What? It's 10:10. So what we basically explained in the Maamar until now is the idea of a geril. The question in the beginning was, what does it mean? The Yontif is called Purim al Shem HaPur. What's special about a geril? Now we have a much better understanding that a geril is this highest level of elikus that's l'mayla mishtalshalos. But despite that, it has dangers in it. L'mayla mishtalshus could be a reason. That's what Haman wanted to reach, to do bad to Eden. But coming back to that idea of the Geirel is that level of the neshama and that level of elikus that's not only higher than rationale, than intellect, but it's higher than ratzin. Like we said earlier in the Maamar, that someone who makes a Geirel, then he's going to willingly follow the results of the Geirel, which means it controls not only his seichel, because his seichel wasn't able to make a determination, but his ratzin. This idea of having a force that's beyond, that's deeper, not only than seichel, but also than ratzin, al derech zehu b'negei lebchira, this we find by another force that has this same characteristics, that it's beyond, it's deeper than seichel and ratzin. It's the kayach of bechira, of choosing. Shu l'mayla miseichel, u l'mayla gam miratzin. Bechira, free choice that we have, has this same characteristic, that it's beyond, it's deeper than seichel and ratzin. The kasher sichlei mechayev shedavar zeroi livchar bei. Choice means, the true definition of free choice is, I'm just choosing, just because. When something is better, when I have two choices that I could either go learn or go watch a baseball game, it's not a choice. Of course I'm going to go learn. That's not called bechira. There's not two choices, right? So if seichel, if I have a rational reason why I have to do one over the other, I'm not choosing that one, I'm doing it because that's what makes sense. Even if I have two possibilities that I want one and I don't want the other, it's not a rational reason, it's a ratzin. It's still the fact that I want one, automatically I'm going to do that. I don't have to choose that one. That's not the concept of bechira, it's not the idea of bechira. Because if I want one, then I have to, my ratzin forces me to that option. It's not the idea, not the play of free choice. The true meaning and the true idea of bechira, choice that's coming neither from seichel nor from ratzin, but just from my nefesh, from the level of nefesh that's deeper than seichel and ratzin. That's what bechira is. Shekach beicher bebchiras hayachavshis. So a similar idea to what we said about geirel, that geirel is a level that's deeper than seichel and ratzin, is also there by bechira. But we're going to show in the Maamar that bechira is even deeper than geirel. That'll help us get out of Haman's scheme.